Hey, welcome. Duvid here, another public study session. Today we're going to be focusing mostly on Israel, a little bit of Jewish history, but largely just what is the current state of the Israeli military? What is the current state of the Israeli-American connection policy? We talk about Israel as a weapons exporter. How good is the Israeli army? Different connections. No classified information. All this information is readily available on the web, and I have all different things, some slideshows, some articles, and people have a lot of conversations. Like, what's the facts? What's the current state of affairs? And so I just want to have a public study session and go over some of these details. And I got a lot of stuff on my desktop here. So sorry for the delay. I'm going to enter screen share. Okay, sorry about the dead time here. So you got to get into a certain mood to ramble on for hours. It's a lot of talking, but to some extent, people know I've been doing these for a while. So the study session is designed for public awareness, things that we're in. So let's just get to some simple U.S. news and World Report. For last year is 2017 ranks Israel as the 8th most powerful country in the world. So add some of these to the links if people want to see these. Go through some of these quickly just to clear some room off my desktop. Here's an article for Haaretz, just talking about Israel as a weapons dealer. We're not going to be talking really Torah today. I'm just talking what's the current state of affairs. And obviously, I used to do building permits in New York, and so you got to get the permit according to the current state of the law. So this is just the current state of affairs. Obviously, it could be more in detail. I've seen a lot of presentations like these, but I figured I'd do my own. So here's an article from Haaretz earlier this year in May, but this one had some nice graphics. I chose most of the stuff, some nice graphics. I have later more detailed political reports. So you got Israel's $9 billion in defense exports. Israel sold over $9 billion worth of weapons. 2012, it had a little decline. Now it's on its highest. Here's customers, who's buying all these weapons from Israel. So you have almost 60% of it Asia and Pacific. A lot of that's India, although different countries. Europe, actually 20% of Israeli weapons are sold to Europe. Latin America, North America, even 2%. And we're going to look, Israel does have some very nice machine guns and different weapons that are pistols that are popular in America. And I'll show you some of those later. So what type of stuff does Israel sell? We got, satellites, mostly missiles, aerial defense, radar, upgrades, communication systems. We do have ammunitions, reconnaissance systems, but Israel probably specializes in missiles, projectiles, radar systems, things like drones is only 2% actually, but that's something Israel is known to be very good at. So I just wanted to open up, get some good information out there. Anyone knows about this issue in the chat. I'm just pumping some information so people interested in the topic have some visuals to read. It's from economics, a breakdown of Israel's economy. So obviously Israel, I even worked in diamonds, the diamond business. It's one of the most dominated of all Jewish fields. So Israel, from our exports, pearls, precious stones, metals, and coins, that's actually the biggest, 22%. Then you have electrical equipment, electronics, pharmaceuticals, machinery, nuclear reactors. Actually, Israel makes and exports nuclear reactors. We look more into that. Optical, a lot of different things. A nice chart here, arms, ammunitions, accessories, 765 million in 2017, almost 3 billion aircraft, spacecraft that Israel actually makes spacecrafts. I think with India, some of the equipment that India, possibly China also, China on the moon, very likely that involves some Israeli equipment. I didn't look into the Chinese, but certainly the Indian government, a lot of these governments get some of their equipment from Israel. So those people are more into numbers and economics. I encourage you to look through some of these exact figures. Let me do another article. Hey, Jonathan, thanks for joining me. Just want to pump through a few of these articles, and then hopefully, if people know about this, you just want to get the current state. Obviously we got Jonathan in Iraq, and Israel, relatively a pretty big military player around the world. So here you're looking at arms exports. So here it's saying Israel arms exports, decade of war and new markets. This one had some nice graphics. Later, I'll show you the actual reports if you want to read like the full reports, but these are just some articles that had some good graphics. So you can see Israel's near all-time highs in export. You can read the exact percentage. Here you could see different countries who are Israel's main customers. Obviously, these in the last few years, India has become by far Israel's largest customer. Turkey used to be a large customer of Israeli weapons, although past the Mavi Mamre, into the blockade, Gaza relationships have soured and sales have went down. Although still Turkey, Israel has relatively better weapons, and we're going to talk about the quality caliber of Israeli weapons that why all these countries buy from us. Although Europe, relatively export of weapons to Europe has decreased, and we'll look at some of these charts and see that relatively Israel has a much better army than almost all but a few European countries. But the current days, the shift east has definitely happened in Israel, the pivot east that people talk about. So let me look at the chat, and I just wanted to pound through a few of those. Yeah, so it might go into more depth. I mean, this is mostly public information. Like if you wanted the exact details of what was sold to India, all this is public information, and that's why I just call it a public study session. There's people at different levels of understanding. I put here just in Michigan. I'm active in the Michigan Israeli Business Bridge. People follow my YouTube channel. They see events, meetings. Now it's a pretty active organization that here we got partnerships with the state, with most of the major corporations, and I think there's well over $100 million a year of business between Michigan and Israel. So that Israel, even just for a state like Michigan, Israel is not like the largest, but up there for one of the larger trading partners. And people want to look more through the webpage and find out more information. I encourage you to. And obviously the governor, has went to Israel, and that we've signed official legislation within the Michigan legislature regarding Israel. Okay, not much feedback from the chat, so I got a few different things. I wanted to go over a little bit about the history of Jews serving in the U.S. Army and other factors, and I couldn't find any good PowerPoint, but might just use Wikipedia to show some of that evidence. And then we'll go more into Israel. Most of this is going to focus on Israel. This is just Wikipedia, Jewish military history. You're saying that, obviously in the ancient times, Israel had a very powerful army. Israel had aligned and fought battles together with Alexander the Great in Egypt, and the Romans, and different times, Egypt and till the Roman destruction of Israel. And then there were always Jewish warriors, senior members of military staffs and countries in the different countries where we resided, all over the world. And it's worthy of a study. I couldn't find good PowerPoints. If I'd found good PowerPoints, I would have. Jonathan, what's Michigan importing from Israel? It's more patent stuff. There's not necessarily stuff that is being made in Israel. There were connections like a 3D printer. Stratasys was Israeli technology, and I think it was being made in Minnesota. They've operations here in Michigan. A lot of driverless technology for cars is stuff from Israel. A lot of security, specifically cybersecurity, is a very big Israeli field. So a lot of the automotive companies have teamed up with Israel in terms of cybersecurity, and especially with the driverless cars. And I have more stuff on this later, and we could see, actually some of the deals, technology, companies, how Israel goes about making these companies and the connection to the Israeli military. But on Facebook, people say I go to technology conventions all the time, and I'm constantly dealing with Israeli companies. I have lots and lots of these booklets that they hand out at these technology shows where you have companies from all over the world, and a lot of them have Israeli offices or Israeli partners. But to get into the patent agreements, and we'll look at later some even like Google, Intel, General Motors, Ford, Siemens, that have research institutes in Israel, and so it's mostly intellectual. There's not too much that is being made in Israel and exported to Michigan. It would more likely be an Israeli entrepreneur who has an idea and comes to Michigan to make it, and then might export it over the world or back to Israel, or licensing of patents, or management services, computer cybersecurity services. So, and I will be going more into some of those more details. And I've been to countless of these presentations of like Israeli business ventures. I mean, I used to trade in stocks in the market, and know. I don't know. Just looking here, the Sakari rebels. I have to look that up. I'm not sure if I even heard of that. But yeah, when I was in New York already, it was pretty popular. This Israeli companies looking for funding, thinking they'll be a big hit in America. I'm not really too much expert on that. I mean, it's making a point like Jews have generally done military service. So the Sakari rebels, looking back historically, or the Mountain Jews, Azerbaijan. I have all those big books about half Jews in the army. But I mean, relatively, I'm saying that, I always disagree with Nathan Kofnes, who says that you'll find an overrepresentation of Jews in everything except for explicitly anti-Semitic fields. And unfortunately, you actually will find Jews maybe disproportionately, even in blatantly anti-Semitic fields. And actually, there are many distinguished Jewish Nazi soldiers, and that's a matter for a different lecture. I wanted to more focus on the current state of Israel's technology, but just saying Jews historically, although there's the general trend of Jews as liberal, Jews as secular, Jews as kind of pacifists, there's always been an element of the Jewish people that has been militaristic and has excelled within the military confines of almost every country that we've been part of, especially here in America. You see the Wikipedia about Jews in America. There were Jews disproportionately of basically every war. So the Revolutionary War, they say there were 160 Jews who served out of a population of only 3,000 Jews. Some prominent ones: Haim Solomon, the Civil War, 8,000 Jewish soldiers who fought for the Union, and 3,000 Jewish soldiers who fought for the Confederacy. And World War II, World War One, World War II, over 500,000 Jews uh, served in the U.S. military, mostly volunteers. So historically, in recent times, there's a small proportion. Jews are very small, like only like 0.6% of the Jewish people serve in the U.S. Army, even though we make up a larger percentage. And but historically, Jews disproportionately were more likely to serve in the military than other people. So it is a note to. I don't want to spend too much time. I want to deal mostly with the present state of Israel. So I was just getting through that stuff, and I wanted to deal largely with the current state of Israeli military technology in the role that Israel plays internationally as a weapons development and even manufacture and sales of weapons, and certainly technology, building up armies, going to armies, helping them with computer technology, missile defense systems, and I'm not a military person. I'm more into theology. However, Israel is largely a military state. That's military is probably what we're most famous for. If anything, there might be certain fields like business, entrepreneurship, but these days, Israel's extremely powerful military. Let's look at some graphics here. So this one might be weighted in a different way. That the powerfulness of the military, here it is: the U.S. number one, Russia number two, China number three, India number four, France number five, UK number six, South Korea number seven. You notice Europe is not necessarily over that powerful. You're saying like Russia, if you consider that part of Europe, but military strength has changed. Israel is pretty powerful. So let's look at there's different statistics, and you could see estimates of the type weapons. So how many aircrafts? Israel has only 600 fighters. And you can see the rank. That's quite a bit. Like in the region, Israel is very dominant. They have the F-35, and this one had a nice graphic. The fair show it. So I'll add this to the chat. So now you could look at Israeli aircrafts, and Israel even manufactures its own aircrafts and drones and attack vehicles. And although historically, you're looking now currently, these are military vehicles that Israel itself makes. So a large portion of what Israel basically has the top things from the U.S. and their own equipment. Historically, they've bought things from different countries. Obviously in the beginning, Israel, was almost completely reliant. 1937, we had actually purchased aircrafts from the Nazis until from Russia. So this interesting history. In 1972, it looks like Israel makes its first warplane. But generally, Israel has extreme air supremacy, although not necessarily over Russia. If people are following the current trends in the missiles, and maybe we'll get more into that. Let's look at armor and artillery and naval strength. Some of the other factors, but so Israel has made their own warcrafts. Kidden, I guess that goes back to the 90s. They got a vessel from Britain before the creation of Israel. Since then, we made our own helicopters and tanks. I don't know if they're especially the greatest in the country, although Israel is only the Mediterranean. They're not. It is what it is. That's why I just want to show the facts. Israel's known relatively pretty good tanks. Israel makes its own tanks. So it gets quite a bit of stuff from America. Involvement with America in making tanks. Here in Detroit, Michigan, we still make tanks. Israel is relatively pretty involved with tank manufacturers. So these are interesting links. This Pax Americana. Yeah, I don't mind doing an interview. I mean, I guess if you message me on Twitter or just put in the chat, like I forget the topic or what you want to speak about at the time. For this one, I would keep to the topic. If I pound through this quickly, maybe I'll just put the link in the chat and see who wants to join in, unless you want to talk about the subject at hand. So here is we saw that 2% of Israeli military export is to America. So here is some Israeli weapons. The Israeli weapons industry, you can see the story. It goes back to 1933, when Israel started making firearms under the British, and the beginning of the army, and we had the creation of the Uzi, quite a few different weapons. But Israel puts out weapons for the consumer market in America. So we'll go over some of these. So I don't know if people watching this, how many people are machine gun owners or into weapons and own guns. But to some extent, Israel is pretty prominent in the field of making guns. And anyone who has a bunch of guns might own Israeli-made guns or be familiar with them. And just show, this is from their catalog, if you want to see their most recent 2018 catalog. And Israel actually has training seminars where they can come and train to use Israeli weapons with the IDF. And we're going to talk more about the Israeli police, Israelis training American police, or American police going to Israel for training. And I have more information on that. But just look at like a general overview of the kind of weapons that Israel makes. People want to read through the history. We got ISO standards and the awards. Gun of the year. Israel has won gun of the year from different organizations many times. If you're a weapons owner, maybe you've seen. If you're familiar with the Tavor, I believe these are all models that are legal and open for the U.S. environment, and they're made specifically for the U.S. market. And if you're into guns, I encourage you to look into them. And you can find practices or your local gun range that might allow you to test one of these. But the Tavor is very respected, very popular. Shooting rifles, pistols, hunting rifles, long range, the Jericho family of pistols. Got training, law enforcement. So the regulations are different. So Israel also specializes in guns made for American law enforcement and military uses. So you say, like, you meet people in the army, they might be your person who's more connected to the army is more likely to know the extent of Israel's power than someone not connected to the army. And even some to say they might use Israeli weapons. So the U.S. Army definitely purchases weapons from Israel. If you're in the U.S. Army, I don't know if anyone is familiar using these, trained on any of these weapons. The Negev, also very popular, light machine gun, compact and lightweight. They also have ones that go around corners. And I'm not a big military weapon person, but I know like that is one of the things we do best. Yeah, with drones, I didn't. We'll look at hopefully drones more, but yeah, I'm saying that Israel. That's why I'm saying that. I'm just focusing now on the Jewish connection to military and weapons, and that's one of the things Israel is most popular for, most well known, most respected for, is our weapons. And as said, Israel is the seventh largest weapons exporter in the world, and even more than most European countries. Let's see if I have. Here's the Wikipedia page. Also, just weaponry of Israel. You'd see like there's a lot of different things. Handguns, machine guns, rifles, tanks, grenades, rocket launchers, missiles. And a lot of these vehicles are in joint collaboration between Israel and other countries. So if people are military experts or interested in this stuff, I encourage you to look through it. Okay, so I did have a few graphics, so let's look at a slideshow real quick. Sorry. Okay, so here we're going to talk about Israel in our training of local police forces. So here is the research, the alliance, which is this is probably like a largely anti-Israel page, but either way, we use their slideshow. So this organization is probably trying to stop the alliance between Israel and America, and so here's the dots on this map are different police forces across America that have been trained by Israel. And there's quite a few. You could probably get a clear list. Here in Detroit and my area, all over the East Coast, West Coast, California, even places across Central America. Israel comes, trains local police forces in certain things, and even people will go to Israel for advanced training. So this is a slideshow that they made. So background on the Israeli training of the American police. Military cooperation between the U.S. and Israel has a long history across American administrations, but peaked shortly after the U.S. declaration of war on terror. Israel has long promoted its unique security expertise as one that is grounded in its military occupation of Palestine in the post-9/11 militarized area. With the American government, military, and police waging at war both abroad and at home, Israel markets itself as an indispensable ally. Since 2002, American police departments have been sending delegations to Israel to train with Israel military personnel. Israel claims to offer training in topics such as identifying and understanding the enemy, intelligence sharing and source development, the relationship between law enforcement and private security, managing, coordinating response to acts of terrorism. Representatives from 200 plus American police departments have already participated in Israeli trainings. Georgia is the biggest. Michigan, here, I guess this may be back a few years back, whatever this data. So California and Georgia are the most, then Texas. Also, you have other organizations besides for police departments, state police, university police, the ICE trains with Israel, border police, special task forces, sheriff's department, transit authority, Air Force acquisition, Marine Corps, FEMA, marshals, naval criminal investigation, drug enforcement agency, SWAT teams, public safety, criminal justice bureaus. So who pays for it? Most of them federal grants from the Department of Justice, Department of Defense and Homeland Security, Israeli government grants. There's a 1033 military surplus donation program. Sometimes the municipality will pay for it themselves. The Donner Foundation, different organizations. So multiple intelligence organizations also support this trainings. They're supported by Homeland Security, research institutes such as Police Executive Research Forum, Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange. People read this on their own. Obviously, we got APAC and ADL federations. We'll look at APAC soon. Also, go through their page, and so what do we specialize in? Crowd control during protest and suppression of riots, intelligence and surveillance of activists, racial profiling and screening, weapons and technologies, balancing anti-crime and anti-terror efforts, hand-to-hand combat, border security, infrastructure, and transportation security. So obviously whoever made these slides is against this. They're not big fans of what's happening. But as I was looking, this largely anti-Israel organization had the best slides. Yeah, Jonathan, I'm trying to improve the quality of my streams. So for doing it live, like it's unclear to who's watching, what's their interest. Maybe I should have put an outline at the beginning. Usually what I do is do the outline afterwards. If I had organized and prepared better, maybe I would have been able to make an outline and stuck to it. But usually I have to afterwards add the table of contents so people will be able to go right to the part that's interesting. This one I kind of wanted to do right away. I'm talking with different people, and I think people. What's the truth? We got new people coming in. The Israel question is different than the Jewish question. People want to know what the facts. Why is Israel so powerful? Entering Congress and these agreements, and we're going to get into the U.S. agreements soon. But yeah, I apologize. I'm trying to increase the quality of my streams, and your comments are appreciated. And I've had you on before, Jonathan. Maybe in the future we could coordinate some streams and make higher quality content. But yeah, I'm trying to do something educational as a service. These are topics that come up all the time in the different streams, and just saying to people, let's know what we're talking about. So let's look at a few more statistics. Here we got this all the way back 2011. There's probably more recent information, but Israeli armed transfers to sub-Saharan Africa. In some areas, Israel is one of the larger suppliers. We'll look at a little more than one of that. Israel accounted for less than 1% of the transfers of major weapons to sub-Saharan Africa. However, they could have been to more hotspots. I encourage people who are more academic to read through this and just maybe look at some of these graphics that Cameroon, Chad, Ecuador, Guinea. I don't know if Jonathan Otto's listening, if he remembers meeting Israelis when his time he was in Israel. I mean, his time he was in Africa, and if they would have been military people, or there's a certain a lot of times Israel will sell to countries that America won't, due to certain reasons. So yeah, I encourage people to read that if they're interested. This one is more recent, fact sheet. So it's more relevant, looking at trends in international arms transfers 2017. This one's got some good graphics. Okay. So here you have the 25 largest exporters of major arms and their major clients from 2013 to 17. So you see Israel is number 8 with about 3% of the exports. And obviously the United States makes up 34%, Russia 22%. Then you got France, Germany, China, UK. Israel is almost tied with Spain, and is a little bit above Italy, and then significantly ahead of the other Ukraine coming in. But using Israel is pretty prominent, it's right up there. And obviously, compared to the U.S. and Russia, but even look at Israel compared to France actually still makes quite a bit of weapons, relatively good at making weapons. Germany, but look at China. Israel is not that far behind, even China or Germany. And but they say who are they selling? So Israel, our biggest client is India, then Azerbaijan, then Vietnam. Almost half of our weapon sales actually went to India. Azerbaijan quite a bit also. Here you can see it in graph form of the share of sales. Israel, Russia, U.S. and Russia, dominating all the others. Although Israel's share has been growing, and Germany and France are on the decline. So you look at relatively Israel's, in terms of weapon sales, is increasing the fastest of any country. and some of the countries ahead of Israel, like Russia and Germany, are declining, and you could see possibly Germany or something, that even Israel could surpass Germany. Importers, who buys the most weapons? So obviously Saudi Arabia is a huge purchaser of weapons. Okay. So who are the biggest buyers of weapons percent? India. Although India gets almost 2/3 of its weapons from Russia, 11% of India's weapons is bought from Israel. You say Saudi Arabia is the next biggest one, then Egypt down smaller, Vietnam. Also, you see Israel's the number 2 supplier behind Russia of Vietnam. South Korea. Israel's the 3rd largest weapon supplier to South Korea. Israel itself, you see, we get most of our weapons from the U.S., then Germany, then Italy. Israel is actually the 3rd largest supplier of weapons to the UK. So, I mean, what's the relationship between Britain and Israel? And you recognize that 5% of the weapons that the UK buys comes from Israel, although 80% comes from the US. Italy, almost 10% of their weapons are purchased from Israel. Azerbaijan, also buying Russia, but 30%. You see the huge change in the strategic relation between India. So in the region of that, you're seeing that Israel has a very powerful military, and not only Israel has a very powerful military, Israel is a big weapons maker. You're saying that you're like, when you're looking at it, saying like Britain buys 5% of their weapons from Israel. There's stuff that they don't know how to make in Britain, and they purchase open market from Israel. So, just like current state, factual alignment. What is the current state of Israel? And we're going to look into more of the politics, but I wanted to get some of that information, just out there. Here's the Davidson Institute. Show this, obviously, Bill Davidson from Metro Detroit. Davidson funds most of the charities on my YouTube page, given our liberal synagogue downtown close to $1 million over a few years, funds countless charities, millions of dollars. Thank God. We talked more about the Davidsons, but they have a research institute at the Weizmann Institute. So here, talk about Israel and science. So, like, obviously, Jews aren't big manufacturers. We're more brains, engineers, thinkers than workers. Although we do, manufacture some things in Israel. Largely, it's the ideas. And so this article traces kind of the history before Israel. 17 wealthy Jews. Sonneborn, one wealthy Jew, donates $1 million for military research in Israel. Research has always been a huge part of Israel, the Jewish character, education, science, high IQ, however you want to look at it. Even though we might perform better in verbal type things, there's, you will look at more. Israel has a huge percentage of engineers. So there's an interesting article about the connection of science research to the power of Israel's military. And there's other interesting things there in the Davidson Institute. And obviously, I just want to show that because Davidson Institute is one of the biggest funders of the stuff I support here in Detroit. Here's another, people are more academic. The Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. I encourage you to read through this stuff. I flipped through some of this stuff. It said this is something I'm constantly studying, and but I didn't really research too much for this live stream. I just wanted to put out some information because people have been asking me about it. So I just figured I'll do a live stream. Maybe if I appear on different live streams or talk about it more in the future, people will be able to refer this, or just for myself to have these facts and figures fresh on my mind to be able to quote. So here, there was a nice report. How did Israel become a global leader in weapons, exporting weapons, even more than powerhouses of previous eras? So, here's a nice report that goes through the history and the development of how Israel became one of the world's largest weapon exporters. And, I encourage people to read through. There's more interesting things in, that this policy reports. I'm going to, see if I go more into these. Okay, so let's look at a quick slideshow. If anyone wants to follow along, this one's on the web. And you just look at the Israeli aerospace industries. What do we got here? 36 slides. So the Bedek Aviation Group, this is the largest defense and aerospace company in Israel, maybe like Boeing in the U.S., established 1953. Cutting edge space, air, land, sea, cyber. 80% of it is exports to other countries, and 40% of all of Israel's defense exports come from this branch. 2013, there were $4 billion worth of aviation sales from Israel to other countries, with a backlog of $10 billion of future orders. These slides are a few years old. 15,000 people actually across the world. Over 6,000 engineers. This is the largest employer of engineers in Israel. The aerospace industry supports 40,000 Israeli households, active in 90 countries, 20 defense awards. It's registered on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. You got missiles, commercial aircrafts, military aircrafts, engineering group, Elta Systems, different divisions. So the MRO, whatever, making these aircrafts for over 60 years. I'm not a big Air Force guy. My grandfather was in the U.S. Air Force, actually, thank God, was a distinguished Flying Cross recipient from the U.S. But I don't know too much about flying. I just thought it showed this is Israel's largest part of our military exports is aviation. Maintenance, modification, overhaul, repair, testing, workshops. Cargo conversions. The Israeli company is one of the leading experts in cargo conversions. An example of a conversion. It's pretty interesting, saying like, here's customers around the world. You could see, literally all over the world, people who know much about the aerospace industry. Israel is extremely prominent in aerospace. You got to work GE, Southwestern America, Air Canada, working probably with the majority of the large air carriers across the world. It's one of the things we do best. Okay. A Glock is an American-made weapon, and I mean Sweden has good weapons, but I mean if you're looking, Israel has a more powerful army than Sweden. Israel has a more international recognized presence than Sweden. Israel exports weapons. There's countless countries all over the world that purchase weapons from Israel. I don't know if Sweden makes weapons there. It's not necessarily a good thing. Like me, my political beliefs in Israel, I'm more actually anti-Zionist, Haredi style. So I'm just going over the factual element of the current status of Israel as kind of a military powerhouse and even a weapons exporter. And I wouldn't be surprised if even Sweden has purchases some weapons or works together with Israel. Okay, so I'm pounding through. Let's look at a few PowerPoints. Okay, just some slides that somewhat relevant. 'Cause Israel, people look at Palestine, and there's two different things. There's the situation with Palestine, and then there's actually military preparedness that say, God forbid if Israel has to go to war with Turkey or Iran, is a different question than dealing with the Palestinians and different military equipment. That's maybe why Israel specializes in training police, because of dealing with civilians and as Palestinians. But Israel has had a lot of wars, and the map. A lot of this stuff is well known. I've went in different things. The refugee crisis, the source of Israelis' land and war conflicts in the region. Yeah, I assume most people watching this probably well known. You had the Israeli War of Independence, the war with actually large nations like Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, Iraq. Israel has been in war with many countries in the Middle East, and generally has won those wars. And different from the issue here is Jordan shelling Jerusalem, 1948. You have the Suez Crisis, Sinai War. I encourage people. I've been reading on these histories, but saying that there's a reason why Israel has kind of had their backs to the wall to focus so much on the military. Yeah, obviously the Suez Canal. Strategically, Israel has always been important, largely due after the creation of the Suez Canal as the passage to India. And when Europe was still powerful, the control of France and England was very important to we're controlling the Suez Canal and keeping it open, and hence we're extremely involved in Israeli politics. And these battles are all interesting. Encourage people. You got the 6 Day War. In 67, we got took back the old city of Jerusalem. We got the wall, although Jordan still controls the Temple Mount. And this is interesting. We look at this more, but because Israel is kind of in a constant state of war, there's a large reason for the development of so much military equipment. Other countries that are more at peace have no reason to constantly be at war or developing this military equipment. You got Gaza. People see you get the wall, and quite a few people will see more slides. Refugee camps. Yom Kippur War. David Accords, creation of the PLO. You think Israel, 70 plus years, so the history is not super long. The Intifada, resistance from within, current state of Jerusalem, disputed status of who controls Jerusalem. Here, example of some of the housing developments in Israel that have been built in recent decades in possibly disputed territory. Obviously, this is a matter for more discussion. But why is Israel so involved in military and stuff like that? Is obviously because we're constantly in a state of war, and so we have mandatory military service. There's special divisions of the army, well funded for military research and different type things that help Israel excel in being a military power. So let me do this one, just this kind of a business one. I've seen like hundreds of these presentations. This one's from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, where kind of Israel comes and tries to sell herself, and invest in Israel, or if they're coming to Jews, study in Israel, move to Israel, and you see all the accomplishments of Israel, where just kind of advertise, Israel's 98th population in the world by population, 149th by territory. We're in a situation of continuous war, compulsory military service for men and women, not too much natural resources, although Israel was founded from immigrants from all over the world. So our resources are human capital and education. Strategy, self-reliance, military technology, government support of innovation, research and development, research-oriented universities, advanced technology, world-class business infrastructure. Dynamism, Israel ranks extremely well, science, technology, education, economic output, when you give it its relative population size. Combination of education, military service, government policy that favors make Israel extremely strong entrepreneur culture, which, also technology in general. This one's not specifically focused on military, but military will be part of it. You hear major innovation areas of Israel: microprocessors, messaging technology, medical diagnostic equipment, pharmaceuticals, cybersecurity, agricultural technology, aerospace engineering. If you read The Startup Nation, a popular book, Dan Senor, who was even Mitt Romney's campaign manager, who lost in 2012. The books became less popular after the decline of Dan Senor, who opposed President Trump, but you still see him pretty commonly on the news. You just see some of Israel's accomplishments. Technology transfer, almost 10,000 patents. Just Hebrew University alone, patents from their graduates, over $2 billion a year in sales. These are probably things coming from Hebrew University, where I took these slides. Here's research collaborations. Intel, there's over 10 projects together for Intel, Google, Roush, Philips, Coca-Cola, GM. A lot of companies have research facilities in Israel. Business school, connect the money to the ideas. Here, some of the exact companies that have been brought forth. Most these aren't too many military. Here's your bio design. I've been to countless of these where people are showing Israeli companies, usually looking for investors or employees, especially University of Michigan. People could recruit employees there. There's an advertisement for a study program at the Tel Aviv University. Startups per million people. Israel is almost 2-to-1 over any place in the world. Silicon Valley being a distant second behind Tel Aviv in terms of startups. The entrepreneurial mindset of the Jew. Obviously, like Netanyahu, his father had wrote in the book on capitalism, the Jews, the Spanish Inquisition. Generally, a lot of Israelis accept this concept of the Jew as the capitalist, as the entrepreneur, as the commerce person. Special startup programs, courses, and how to do all these things. Crowdfunding, most recent strategies, business plans. How to monetize your ideas. Something generally Jews are very good at. Israel obviously excels in this. Some big sales like Waves, agricultural equipment, popular books coming out of Israeli universities. Risk-taking, Israeli culture places a premium on risk-taking, entrepreneurship. Compulsory military service prepares individuals for the corporate, team-oriented, and highly competitive environment. High education, research, and innovations are respected by Israeli society. Scientific and technological advancements are further strengthened by the presence of international research and development centers of world-leading technology firms, including Intel, Microsoft, IBM, Motorola, Google, Philips, Oracle, Siemens, HP, Samsung, Huawei, GM, and more. 74 Israeli companies are currently traded in the Nasdaq Stock Exchange. One of the largest representations for a non-U.S. economy. 2015, $3.5 billion was raised from venture capitalists, and 69 companies were sold for the total sum of $5.4 billion. Warren Buffett, big fan of Israel. Bill Gates, China. nanotechnology, big field of Israeli expertise, 3D printers, I mentioned those earlier. Agriculture, farming products, see pesticides, Monsanto, healthcare products, pharmaceuticals, computer science. Constantly hearing the news, Israeli new entrepreneur became wealthy, sold his business. Yeah, I use the term we. So space-time. I'm not an Israeli citizen. I'm in the U.S. I studied in Israel for 3 years, but I will still use the word we, including myself and Israeli. Although technically I'm a U.S. citizen. I studied in Israel. I've never served in the Israeli army or anything like that. But as a Jew, someone who's active in Israel, and even as an anti-Zionistic Jew, someone who relatively harbors Haredi opinions, I'll still use a we. Um, I'm Duvid, I'm a U.S. citizen, I'm loyal to the country, the U.S., but I have a we that includes Jewry, international Jewry. I have a we that includes Israel, so I have no problem having an Israeli with a we, although, that could be legally problematic if it were for paperwork perspective. Just before I show these, just a quick PowerPoint, 6-Day War. People try to understand politics. So these were relatively good slides, so I thought I'd show them. Kind of like water wars, greater strategic control. The Israel needs water. You see some of the rivers, why Israel needs to hold up further perspective to hold on to the West Bank because of the water sources. Some basic history, and like maybe a different time, maybe I'll look at more history of Israel, but I want to focus more on military technology. U.S. Liberty. We'll look at this. I have a different one of, look what happened with the U.S. Liberty. Obviously that war worked out less good for Israel than. But these were good slides, so I just thought I'd show through them. So we look at one more. This one probably also anti-Israel organization that made these slides, but they got some good maps. So look at the settlements, the history of settlements. Where are these settlements? The relationship between settlements and the Palestinians with the larger Israeli military complex that it doesn't really have the conflict with Palestinians is different than the larger Israeli military. They're connected, and obviously Israel needs large amounts of troops on staff for the conflict with Palestine. But the military equipment they have is not really in need for the battle with Palestinians. They're mostly civilians or aren't that well armed. They're more for larger threats. We got a lot of Americans, U.S. citizens that are now Israeli politicians. You look at the creation of Israel. So when Israel took over the land, a lot of Palestinians were driven out, forced out of the land, put into refugee camps, and that's a consistent problem for today. Possibly one of the greatest human rights catastrophes in the world is the Palestinian refugee situation. You look at all these villages that were depopulated, hundreds and hundreds of villages where Palestinians, most likely were driven out or left against their will, gave up their property against their will, and were pushed outside the land into refugee camps or wherever they could survive. So, back in the 40s when it happened, you had about 700,000, I guess, refugees, and now they're millions. And here is 2 2001, and you can see like in Jordan, there's over 1 million. There's huge centers of refugees all over the world that came from these Palestinians being driven off the land and forced outside of Israel. And most of them have exponentially grown and are sitting at the border of Israel. So Israel basically decided to fill in a lot of these former uh, use the houses and give them, actually a lot of the Arabs that were expelled from Arab lands ended up living in the houses of former Palestinians that had left. Some of the towns were like destroyed or remade over. It's a big dispute. You can look at the maps and the conversion of former Arab towns into Jewish towns. There's a lot of research on this. So you see there's kind of the two-prong Israel, God forbid, constant war with Palestine, and then there's the larger global military threats of the zone where Israel has to be worried about possible, God forbid, war with Turkey, Egypt, Iraq, Iran, Syria, and think Israel has a significantly more powerful army than those countries. So you have that multiple pronged threat that forces Israel to really put a lot of care and strength into the military, mandatory military service, constant investment, creating one of the world's biggest military industrial complexes. I didn't want to make this on the settlements, but it is connected. It's important. Be doing more on these issues. So you got 16 people watching. Not too much activity in the chat. Well, I am rounding up, so if someone wants to come on and talk about some of this. So let's see this one more slide thing. This also from like a more anti-Israel organization. We'll go from the negative aspects of the U.S.-American relationship. These all interesting characters, like people who know about Israel probably know quite a bit about all these famous Israeli characters. All these people were very involved in the U.S. You look at, President Truman. This is more like just showing all the negative aspects of U.S.-Israeli policy. Then we see, generally the Israel-U.S. policy is very aligned, although obviously it was never 100%. There's always been opposition to Israel within America. Things that Israel did that America wasn't pleased about, a list of them. Here we got the 206 pounds of weapon-grade uranium displaced from the Nuclear Materials and Equipment Corporation of Apollo, Pennsylvania, bought by David Lowenthal, who decided possibly to give that to Israel. You've had multiple cases of Israelis spying on America. So the U.S. Liberty Attack from '67. Got the Roger Plan projected by Israel. So I'm just to be factual and saying that Israel, there is a lot of complaints against Israel, and here is a collection of hundreds of complaints against Israel from probably a pro-Palestinian organization, but they made some nice slides. So I figured try to be objective here. The Jewish role in Iran-Contra, Israeli role in Iran-Contra, even Jews, Israelis been selling weapons to Iran, or teaming up with America's enemies in South America. So I mean, the relationship between the U.S. and Israel has never been perfect. There's always been complaints. There's always been problems. There's constant critics of Israel, and a lot of them has reasons to be critical. Although I'm going to show you the connection America and Israel is extremely strong. and the history of legislation. But I thought I'd show that slideshow just for people curious. So let's look at, this is the Congressional Research Service. Policy, new Congress, new congressional staff. This is most recent study this year, April 2018, Congressional Research, U.S. Foreign Aid to Israel. The report provides an overview of U.S. foreign assistance to Israel, includes a review of past aid programs, data on annual assistance, analysis of current issues, general information on Israel. Refers to a different report that I'll be showing you next. Israel is the largest cumulative recipient of U.S. foreign assistance since World War II. To date, the United States has provided Israel $134.7 billion in bilateral assistance and missile defense funding. Almost all bilateral aid to Israel is in the form of military assistance, although in the past, Israel also received significant economic assistance. At a signing ceremony in the State Department on September 14, 2016, representatives of the U.S. and Israeli government signed a new 10-year memorandum of understanding on military aid covering 2019 to 28. Under the memorandum of understanding, the United States pledges to provide $38 billion in military aid to Israel, replacing a previous promise of only $30 billion. Israel is the first international operator of the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, the Department of Defense fifth-generation stealth aircraft, considered to be most technologically advanced fighter yet ever made. To date, Israel's purchased 50 F-35s in 3 separate contracts. The fiscal year 2018 Consolidated Appropriations Act provided the following to Israel: $3.1 billion in military finance, of which $815 million is for offshore procurement, $705 million for joint U.S.-Israeli military defense projects, including $92 million for Iron Dome, $221 million for David Sling, $310 million for Arrow 3, $82 million for Arrow 2, $47 million for the U.S.-Israeli Anti-Tunnel Cooperation Program, $7.5 million in migration and refugee assistance, $4 million for the establishment of the U.S.-Israeli Center of Excellence in Energy and Water Technology, $2 million the Israel-U.S. Binational Research and Development Foundation Energy Program. Okay, you'll see President Trump, dealing with Israel, people talking about the wall, and President Trump quotes Israel, and Netanyahu is, seeing the connection. So, we'll see that what happens between Israel and America is really back and forth, with Israel providing intelligence and technology to America. And as I said, that America actually purchases a substantial amount of weapons from Israel. So people, look into Congress and using this concept of a qualitative military edge, that when the U.S. sells military equipment, that they might sell to opposing parties that have conflicts with each other, but agree that one side will always have a qualitative military edge. And, look over some of this. I put the link in the chat already. So, the more studious people, I encourage you to read that. Thanks, Claire, for joining. Okay, total foreign U.S. aid from the U.S. to Israel military has been almost $95 billion. Economic aid has been about $35 billion of economic aid to Israel that stopped a few years ago, where Israel's economy has been relatively strong. But actually, America, used to give direct economic aid to Israel also. So what is this qualitative military edge? Almost all current U.S. aid to Israel is in the form of military assistance. U.S. military aid has helped transform Israel's armed forces into one of the most technologically sophisticated militaries in the world. U.S. military aid for Israel has been designed to maintain Israel's qualitative military edge over neighboring militaries. The rationale for a qualitative military edge is that Israel must rely on better equipment and training to compensate for being much smaller in land area and population than its potential adversaries. U.S. military aid also has helped Israel build its domestic defense industry, which ranks as one of the top global suppliers of arms. So, 2008, Congress passed legislation defined qualitative military edge as the ability to counter and defeat any credible conventional conventional military threat from an individual state or possible coalition of states or from non-state actors, while sustaining minimal damage and casualties through the use of superior military means possessed in sufficient quantity, including weapons, command control, communications, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities that in their technical characteristics are superior in capability to those of such individual or possible coalition of states or non-state actors. Presidents required to carry out an empirical and qualitative assessment on an ongoing basis of the extent to which Israel possesses a qualitative military edge over military threats to Israel. Section 2008 amended Section 36 of the Arms Export Control Act to require certification for proposed arms sales to any country in the Middle East other than Israel, to include a determination that the sale or export of the defense articles or defensive services will not adversely affect Israel's qualitative military edge over military threats to Israel. This is U.S. law. This is official U.S. legislation. So, encourage people to read through. Current state of the 10-year memorandum, phase out offshore procurement, phasing that out, missile defense increasing, no longer allowed to purchase fuel, different parts of the agreement. We could go more into this if anyone in the chat knows quite a bit about this. We talked about the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, certain connection to the Federal Reserve, charging of interest. And usually the Congress ends up giving more money to Israel than is requested. And so you see like the requested versus enacted. So historically, Congress has been more than happy to give more money than Israel even asked for, and just randomly increases and say, here, take more money. Iron Dome, missile defense systems. See, actually millions of dollars. David Sling, Arrow 2, Arrow 3. All forms of missile defense. The last few years, you hear about like the terror tunnels. So, God forbid the wall. I'm not a big fan of the wall, but there is the wall now, and there are always tunnels being dug under it and security threats. And so there's special funding for protecting tunnels, and it's obviously you hear President Trump talking about the wall of Mexico. Obviously, he says America has invested so much money in Israel. Israel is one of the best testing grounds for migration and refugee assistance funding for Israel. Since 1973, Israel has received grant from the State Department's Migration and Refugee Assistance Account to assist in the resettlement of migrants to Israel. Funds are paid to the United Israel Appeal, a private philanthropic organization in the U.S., which in turn transfers the fund to the Jewish Agency of Israel. Between 73 and 91, the United States gave about $460 million for resettling Jewish refugees in Israel. Loan guarantees. Since 1972, the United States has extended loan guarantees to Israel to assist with housing shortages, Israeli absorption of new immigrants from the former Soviet Union and Ethiopia, and its economic recovery following the 2000 to 2003 recession. And U.S.-Israeli scientific and business cooperation since the early 70s, different foundations and research groups. Okay, so let's look at the next one. So this is from the same organization. This one's the background on U.S.-Israel relations. Since the founding 1948, successive U.S. presidents and many members of Congress have demonstrated a commitment to Israel's security and to close U.S.-Israel cooperation. Strong bilateral ties influence U.S. policy in the Middle East, and Congress provides active oversight to the executive branch's actions. Israel's leading recipient of U.S. foreign aid and a frequent purchaser of major U.S. weapon systems. By law, U.S. arms sales cannot adversely affect Israel's qualitative military edge over other countries in its region. The two countries signed a free trade agreement in 1985, and the United States is Israel's largest trading partner. Israel regularly seeks help from the United States to bolster its regional security and defense capabilities. Legislation in Congress frequently includes proposals to strengthen U.S.-Israeli cooperation, such as the U.S.-Israeli Security Assistance Authorization Act of 2018. Concerns about Iran's dominant Israel's strategic calculations. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu influenced President Trump's May 2008 decision to withdraw from the Iran deal. So, encourage people to read through this, see the historical overview. Here you got Israeli security challenges, U.S. policy issues, bilateral trade. I think there were a few good graphics in this. This is more like a political primer. If people want to know more about Israeli politics, I encourage you to read that. Here's a research paper about, this one's a full 120 pages, about Israel's technology sector from 2008. Although, study provides a general assessment of the science and technology in research and development landscape in Israel, one of the world's most prolific innovators in advanced technologies, particularly information and communication technology. Israel is widely seen as the Silicon Valley-like, and perhaps second only to Silicon Valley, as an exemplification of the phenomenon of a startup-intensive, entrepreneurship-led high-tech cluster. The report is organized in 4 major sections. First, an introductory section summarizes the factors that account for the takeoff of the Israeli high-tech cluster in the early 1990s and for its continued flourishing. The second section presents the key indicators of Israel's strength as an R&D-based innovating economy, including input indicators such as R&D expenditure and human capital, and output indicators including patents, publications, the number of high-tech startups, contribution of high-tech products and high-tech exports to the overall Israeli economy. Third section focuses on government policy decisions and actions that have played a crucial role in Israel's emergence and current standing as a high-tech powerhouse. The fourth section discusses Israel's achievement and trends in the country's key technology sectors and emerging sectors: information and communication technologies, biotechnology, nanotechnology, clean tech, environmental technologies, military technologies, aerospace, and unconventional weapons. The report concludes that Israel's high-tech cluster is thriving despite the global implosion of ICT in the early 21st century, and notwithstanding Israel's persistent security problems. Israel's high-tech cluster seems to be resilient, in part because of the benefits that the presence of other firms, by definition, bestows on the individual firms within the cluster. In addition, Israel's high-tech industry is reasonably diversified and growing more so, thanks in part to deliberate government actions to foster renewal forces within the cluster. So this one's over 100 pages. I encourage more academic people to read through it. And maybe you'll see a few highlights. Key findings. Israel, a country about 7 million people with a gross domestic product of about 140 billion, contributes disproportionately to the world's innovation in a broad range of science and technology fields. Israel is one of the most prolific centers of high technology innovation in the world. Many see Israel as second only to Silicon Valley in exemplifying the phenomenon of high-tech cluster, specifically an entrepreneurship-led cluster as defined by the U.S. Department of Commerce in 1997. Such economic clusters are regional agglomerations of interrelated industries in which the concentration of firms produced benefits for each particular firm. The technological composition of Israeli innovations matches worldwide technological trends, reflecting in part the fact that Israel high technology is heavily export-oriented. As in the Silicon Valley cluster, Israel's technology sector is based on startup companies whose proliferation has spawned a financial community of venture capital firms to invest in startups. Israel has more companies listed in the U.S. stock exchange than any other country except the United States and Canada. Israeli companies in many fields are typically small with fewer than 20 employees. Core of Israel's technology cluster remains the information and communication technology that originally fueled the emergence of the cluster in the 1990s: hardware design, computer software, data communications, electro-optics, network, internet security. Related important high-tech industries in Israel include military technology and avionics. Israel high-tech sector and diversifying with greater focus on life science industries, especially biotechnology and agrobiotechnology. In the last decade, biotechnology has been designated a national priority. On various measures of activity in biotechnology, Israel ranks among mid-sized West European countries such as Belgium. Within biotechnology, Israel is at the forefront of the field of stem cell research. 2006 Israeli researchers ranked in second place after the U.S. in absolute number of peer-reviewed scientific publications in the field. Israeli stem cell researchers do not face restrictions based on religious grounds, except for a ban on human cloning. Emerging sectors in Israel also include nanotechnologies and clean technologies for resource preservation and environmental cleanup. Israel has long been an innovator in water technologies, drip irrigation and recycling, and in solar energy. Israel invented drip irrigations and boosted the world's largest desalination facility. The government has recently stepped up support programs in the water and renewable energy fields. Specific national government policy decisions involving research and development and science and technology are key factors in the emergence and continued flourishing of Israel's high-tech cluster. Israel pursues an industrial policy in which R&D-based, product-oriented innovation and entrepreneurship are seen as central to economic development. Government offers various kinds of support not only for R&D in the business sector, but also for the creation of new businesses. So, early as the late 1960s, government recognized that Israel's comparative advantage lay in its high-quality human capital and advanced R&D capabilities in science and technology. These assets historically emanated from two sources: Israel's world-class academic institutions and the military's computer training and high-tech R&D units. Israel's explicit policy, reaffirmed and strengthened over the years, has been to leverage and diffuse its pre-existing R&D prowess in the civilian commercial sector in order to realize greater returns from R&D for the entire economy. The Office of the Chief Scientist of the Ministry of Industry, Trade, and Labor, established to implement the government's industrial policy, not only back civilian commercial research programs, but also positively encourage the development of high-tech startup companies, allowing them to set their R&D agenda. The Office of the Chief Scientist operates programs that support civilian commercial sector innovation through R&D grants for product development, technology incubators, academia to industry technology transfer units, and numerous international R&D cooperation agreements. With the Israeli government's encouragement, international technology giants continue to establish or expand product development centers in Israel. Beginning in the 1980s, the government provided incentives, grants, and tax breaks to companies that located their R&D centers in Israel. Incentives were not provided to local, lower-skilled, high-technology manufacturing operations in Israel. Recognizing Israel's R&D and human capital advantages, numerous leading U.S. technology firms or multinational enterprises such as Cisco, Intel, Lucent have cited their core R&D functions in Israel, either by establishing R&D units there or by acquiring and transforming Israeli startups. Policies of the Israeli state have also propelled the Israeli high-tech sector to its intimate relations with the U.S. financial world and high-tech industrial sector. In many ways, the Israeli high-tech cluster is an integral part or extension of the U.S. high-tech sector. Close relationship with the U.S. has enabled Israelis to identify gaps in the U.S. high-tech market and to develop innovative niche market products, for example, internet firewalls, instant messaging, and data storage media such as flash drives. Israel's high-tech sector is very attractive to international investors who typically buy stock in Israeli publicly listed companies or participated in direct buyouts of Israeli companies. Israeli technology companies raise capital in various stock markets, with most listing in the U.S. Most VC funding for Israeli companies comes from the U.S. Israel has many R&D collaborations with foreign partners, although the U.S. remains by far its largest partner. Israel in recent years has diversified its cooperation to include Europe, India, and Singapore. In the area of military technology, Israel is a major world exporter with strengths in unmanned weapons technology, missiles, small satellites, as well as state-of-the-art small arms. In exchange for a high level of U.S. military support, Israel is obliged to buy the major part of its military equipment from the United States. Since sales to its own domestic market are thus constrained, Israel's own defense industry is dependent on experts. Conflicts between the U.S. and Israel periodically arise over Israel's plans to share military technology with other countries, for example, recently China. Currently, as in earlier decades, Israeli policymakers are anxious to foster the ability of researchers to commercialize their research breakthroughs through the development of cutting-edge products. As in the past, Israelis hope to succeed with the kinds of niche products developed by Israeli ICT for the internet and personal computers. The very nature of Israel as a high-tech cluster bestows upon it agglomeration benefits that make likely the country's continuing strength as an innovator of ICT. At the same time, the cluster benefits produced by the concentration of firms, concentrated technological skills, capital availability, business mentoring, and specialized services are a likely source of resilience that will also conduce to Israel's innovation success in new fields. New fields in which Israel currently holds an edge globally include stem cell research, certain water technology, including desalination, solar energy technology, stem cell research, and other biotech research on therapies. The challenge is to move promising therapies through the numerous testing phase to a select saleable product. Israel's small size could limit its success in such resource-intensive enterprise. In water and solar technology, Israel's head start could evaporate when other countries get more serious about resource alternatives. Both the government and the private sector in Israel continually bear such risks in mind. Okay, encourage people to read through this whole thing if they have the ability to. And like I skim through this whole thing, and I'm constantly reading things like this, in publications and even startups, even directly involved in Israeli firms that are raising money here in the U.S. or looking to expand business here. Okay, so let's do one last PowerPoint about Israel as an innovation center, not so much focused on the military. The Warren Buffett quote, some Americans have come to the Middle East looking for oil. We came to the Middle East looking for brains, and we stopped at Israel. In Israel's growth has outpaced OECD countries consistently. Job creation, Israel, beating EU, Poland, Brazil, China. Venture capital. Israel's a big export country. Israel has one of the highest percentage, possibly highest percentage in the world of the budget dedicated to research and development. Innovation capacity store. Some places have Israel as the top country in the world over the U.S. However they rate these things. Competitive advantage, expenditure on research and development, highest in the world. Flexibility and adaptability, entrepreneurship of managers, available scientists and engineers, info technology skills, and venture capital only behind the U.S. And obviously the U.S. has quite a few Jews here too. High-tech capital, talking about hundreds of millions, billions of dollars raised for Israeli companies, sale of companies, mergers and acquisitions, larger companies constantly buying smaller Israeli companies. Companies, a lot of them start within the Israeli military, are used specifically within the Israeli military, go out to larger Israeli society, and from there will be purchased from larger American companies. All these places have purchased Israeli startups. See the biggest firms from around the world. International investments in Israel. Multinationals have huge centers. IBM, Microsoft, Intel, Google all have big centers in Israel. And Israeli companies are very good at making profit off of their technology. Why Israel? Culture, Jewish culture, combination of military service, strong ethno-nationalism, government that backs this. Everything is working together for this entrepreneurship in Israel. Obviously, the power of being at war, having mandatory military service, having a military culture, where the majority, besides for ultra Orthodox Jews like me, are basically in and out of the army their whole life. Engineering talent, cheap. 2011 saw 40% of Intel's revenue come from the product lines developed by Intel's Israel and Haifa. $6 billion investment of Intel into Israel. So some recent companies doing pretty good. The Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, startups, investments. I've seen so many of these presentations. I went to so many events where people have went over Israel, and then usually they show their company and ask for money. I just found these slideshows. I've been to so many events where this is what they do is try to get investors for Israeli inventions and yes, I thought I'd go through these slides. Could be later we'll deal more with Israel's economy. I want to focus largely on the military today. So, okay, I got one last thing I want to look at. So, I thought I had APEC's page up. You could look at APEC. APEC has a lot of official information on its page about U.S. policy. Here's the Jewish Virtual Library of just different agreements. So here's memoranda and agreements going back from 52. Look at all these different agreements signed. Commonly, you'll hear like the Congress, the Senate will pass 100-0 a memorandum with Israel. Like June 25th, 2018, the Joint Center of Excellence in Energy probably passed 100-0 in the Senate. So people want to be more academic. You could look through all these things. So let me see who I got here in the chat. If anyone wants to join, maybe I'll even drop the Hangout link and see if anyone wants to pop on. So let me drop my Hangout link in the chat. If anyone's been watching, wants to join on and talk about Israel. People are asking me about this topic. I thought I'd do just do a public study session on it. So here's the Hangout link in the chat if anyone has been watching and wants to discuss some of this. Shows me here I got 10 people watching. That doesn't give me any names in the chat, so the link is in the chat. I'll give it a minute or two. I almost canceled doing this tonight. I just didn't feel like talking for 2 hours straight, but I did it anyway. So I've been talking for like an hour and a half. I wanted to do this research. I wanted to show some of this information, put it out there, encourage people to investigate and learn more about this, and just for future debates or discussions on the topic. People hopefully talk from a more factual element, and a lot of times it's hard for people to understand this because people know Jewish history and they think like the Holocaust and Jews as victims, And then you're telling like Israel is the seventh biggest weapons exporter in the whole world. Like Israel sells more weapons around the world than most European countries that were global powers in the last 100 years. Um, and yeah, I mean, looking at the current state, this you get deal with the factual world as it is. I've expressed my opinions on Israel many times. My politics, I'm more liberal. I have different visions for Israel. We'll see with the elections. I've had Shlomo Gordon, spoke with him a few times. I'm more Haredi in theology. I might even call myself, God forbid, like anti-Israel or to a certain element. Though obviously I'm a Jew. Like my life is Israel, so Israeli politics are complicated. How you could somewhat, be an Orthodox Jew in Israel and have an anti-Israel outlook, although be officially part of the government, which is very complicated to understand. But it's like, okay, David could be anti-Israel and at the same time be officially part of the Israeli government. And that's the complications of religion and state in Israel and the value of Torah study, and saying like, well, what did you do for Israel? Like, I study Talmud. I'm an Orthodox Jew. I have payas, and that's the greatest service of all to Israel. There is no service greater to Israel than being a religious Jew, following the laws of Moses, studying Talmud, talking about Hashem, and that's somewhat official. That's how Israel works. I'm saying that's part of Israeli law. That's military exemption for Orthodox people is an exemption because the service that Orthodox Jews do is more important than service to the state, service to God, whatever. So it's complicated things, and so people have to understand how I could have such harsh opinions on Israel. Generally, like I favor one-state solution. I favor giving citizenship to all Palestinians. I'll say that the creation of Israel was a mistake and such things. And these are somewhat mainstream opinions among certain sectors of Orthodox Jews, although, so whatever complications, I assume we'll have these debates again and again. They're very popular these days. Israel's coming up to elections. America, we just finished elections. Some of these things would be kind of like the policy briefings that new people in Washington would get around Israel. And you see the connection between Israel, that Israel is already connected enough to the U.S. That people approaching federal positions will know about Israel before they get into power. People that are against Israel will have difficulties raising money, or will have pro-Israel organizations support their opponents. We don't even want someone who might be against Israel winning a Democratic or Republican primary. The lobbying arm of Israel is well known. Rashida Tlaib was talking about her. She's from my area. I've met Tlaib. I kind of like Tlaib, but we'll see how that works out. But you're looking at the long trajectory of Israeli-U.S. alliance, the network, how tied up we are together. Look at any trajectory forward that isn't building off of this alliance would take quite a bit of work. So I tried to be neutral and just get quite a bit of the facts out there. And the connection when we talk about multiculturalism, people know I favor multiculturalism and diversity in America. Although I'm largely conservative, like I said, balanced budget, government shutdown. Like I'm happy. I'd like to see them balance the budget and pay off the debt and things like that. And usually when I'm talking about Israel, I have more liberal policies about, God forbid that I'm decrying what's happening to the Palestinians on behalf of Jews, and saying it's not good for us Jews to be the cause of suffering to Palestinians. However, that doesn't change the fact of, I'm involved in Michigan Israeli Business Bridge. Most of my associates are Jews. I'm an engineer. And so I just want to put out the information, public study session. Looks like no one's taking the link in the chat. I appreciate, whatever 8 people are watching. Shua Tov. Maybe I'll sing a song, finish it out. These words are said after Sabbath from Isaiah. The words in Hebrew, Sali Veroni Yoshevet Zion Ki Gudol Bekirbe Kadosh Yisrael. Sali usually means a word for happy, although Tzahal is also a word for the Israeli army. That Sahal will be like refer to a unit in the army, but the word is in the prophecy Sali Veroni, 2 words for like happiness. Yoshevet B'Tzion, those who sit in Zion. Ki Gudol Bekir Bek, because greatness is within Kadosh Yisrael, the holies of Israel. So it's kind of from Isaiah talking about futuristic visions when at the end of days, happy will be Tali Veroni, Yoshevet B'Tzion, happy will there be the people who sit in Zion, Ki Gudol Bekir Bek Kadosh Yisrael, because greatness exists among the holies of Israel. And one great chanting song, and I thought it might be relevant because you hear the word Sali is also the root word for Israeli army, Tzahal. Sali v'rayni Yoshevet Zion, Yoshevet Zion, Ki Gudol Bekir Bek Kadosh Yisrael, Kadosh Yisrael, Sali v'rayni Yoshevet Zion, Ki Gudol Bekir Bek Kadosh Yisrael, Kadosh Yisrael, Sali v'rayni Yoshevet Zion, Yoshevet Zion, Ki Gudol Bekir Bek Kadosh Yisrael, Kadosh Yisrael. Okay, Shuvato, be blessed. A little chanting. Blessings to everybody. Hope to see everyone soon. People watch this. Hope they gain from it. Feel free to leave comments in the chat in the description. I hope to afterwards soon. Hopefully tonight or tomorrow. Next few days at the latest to go through, and I'll timestamp the description. Maybe I'll try in the future to kind of have a table of contents before I do this, as opposed to afterwards. But for now, I guess it is after Sabbath, so maybe I'll sing Eliyahu Hanavi, a song to Elijah the prophet. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Atishri, Eliyahu Agiladi, V'imheira Yavon Eleni, Mashiach ben David, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Atishri, Eliyahu Agiladi. Okay, thanks for watching, everybody. Be blessed. Shalom. Hope good things are coming to everybody. People who observe and enjoy Sabbath, hope they had a good Sabbath. And Sabbath, we're supposed to reach higher levels of spirituality, connection to God. And then when Sabbath is done, we descend back into the mundaneness of reality. But hopefully the Sabbath lifts us up to a higher level, and we continue a journey of reaching these higher levels on Sabbath, and then trying to sustain it through the week, and our continual journey to serve God and make the best of out of material life. So thanks a lot, everybody. Hope they gain from this blessings.